Hi, everyone. My name is Kimia. I'm part of Women in Architecture, part of the programming committee. Today, we're going to be talking about hybrid workspaces and a little bit about psychology of spaces. Robin will be taking that on. So who is back at the office? If you could please use that raise hand button at the bottom and let us know how many of you are working from office, how many of you are working from home. So the people that are working from office, can you please raise your hands? Oh, I should also raise my own hand. Oh, wow, we only have, that's interesting. We only have 5 people from the attendees out of 25. 1 are in the offices and we analysts that are working from the office. Okay, great. So as you all know, as mentioned, we're going to be talking about hybrid workspaces. So in order for you guys to kind of start thinking about it and know what we're going to get in more depth about, I would like to invite you to start answering some poll questions. We're going to share the results at the end. And whenever you're done, just please raise your hands so I know when everybody is done. Okay.
So here are the results.
Great. So when do you expect to welcome people back to the offices? Already have, okay. Fall, some people are saying don't know. Okay, great. What entices you back into the offices? The buzz and the energy. That's actually what I thought would be as well. Easily bookable coffee shop like or living room like collaboration spaces. Nobody chose the free snacks? Wow.
I thought everybody would.
Scheduled social events, knowing that I could have a space to do uninterrupted heads down work. Okay, so 56% are actually just for the energy, completely understandable. It's lonely at home a lot of the times. Number 3, activities. What activities would you continue to do at home? Informational collaborative meetings, okay, administrative, focus, creative, or deep work. Yeah. Okay. If you're planning on hybrid work, how is your organization planning to decide who comes into the office? Not sure yet. Okay, so it seems like actually most of the people are actually really not back. That's interesting. What types of spaces do you expect to need more of in the office? Hybrid collaboration spaces. Yeah. Based on what you're seeing locally, what trends do you predict for an organization's real estate footprint to be by December 2022? An organization's real estate footprint will decrease. Okay, I would really like to see what the actual study says on that. Do you see more companies moving towards unassigned desking models in Vancouver? Yes. Do you see companies shifting the ratio of individual desking into more collaboration spaces in Vancouver? Yes. Okay, that's great. I feel like Robin has a lot of input right now from this. So Robin is our speaker. I'm going to introduce Robin and then hand it off to her to take it on. So a little bit about Robin. She has worked as a designer in commercial and residential interior and wayfinding design since 2011. Prior to the diploma program at BCIT for interior design, she completed her bachelor in science from UBC and was awarded an NSERC grant to study neurodegenerative diseases. Her love of problem solving and design also led her to become a sustainable building advisor through Cascadia Green Building Council. Robin has a strong passion for continually developing her education, specifically focusing on the influence that our design environment has on our behaviors and well-being. Currently, she is pursuing her master's degree in organizational psychology. Her role as an architecture and design manager with Steelcase allows her to share her passions for both design and research with the architectural and design community. With her diverse background, she's able to communicate both creative ideas and evidence-based science that supports them. This is really fascinating and mind-blowing, Robin. I'm very, very happy to be here and hear all the research that you've done. So I'm going to pass it on to Robin.
Thank you, Camilla. So thank you for having me here. I really appreciate it. And you will hear that I get very excited and geeky about the nuances of research. And a lot of this is still case research that I'm going to be sharing tonight. And then I just have kind of peppered in some stuff that I've read in academic journals, even as recently as this week, and stuff that was published last month. So you'll see that in here as well. But that being said, I'm going to share my screen. Wonderful. And I believe somebody else will be monitoring the chat. If we want to save questions to the end, I'm happy to stay around and answer anything I can. I was mentioning to the WIA team at the beginning that I love the questions the most that I don't know the answers to, because it just gives me another excuse to do more research. So feel free to pepper me with those hard questions.
Robin, just so you know, I'm going to keep all the questions instead of interrupting you. I'm going to keep all of them for the end.
Wonderful. So we're going to dive into what it means to create a hybrid workplace. But before we do that, we're going to talk about like some of the research that we collected over the last year. So before we dive in, I like to show this slide. And on the right-hand side, this is actually an article from the Steelcase 360 magazine from 15 years ago. 15. Like, we have been talking about distributed teams at Steelcase for that long. And we've been talking about how you design for that distance between different employees for that amount of time. One of my favorite examples in here is actually this idea of a wormhole, which is something that our CEO had set up with another CEO, actually of IDEO in California, where it was essentially like a team or a Zoom open live feed where they'd be working in their offices and they could turn to each other in this live feed and talk to them about different ideas and questions, so they could riff off something at that new stage of an idea, rather than having to translate it into a text format and it be an asynchronous conversation because they're across the country from each other. It allowed them to just deep dive in and generate new ideas together. But even though we've been doing this for 15 years, the idea of telework is also not new. That word came into our language in 1974. So it's nearly 50 years old that we've been studying how to design for knowledge workers that aren't necessarily in the same space at the same time. So, and then the obligatory CEU pages. So it is covered through all the different organizations. We are collecting the numbers for AIBC, but if there is anybody on here that is IDCEC, feel free to shoot me an email or put that in the chat as well, and I can get you the credits there. The additional obligatory page, but knowing that there's a lot of text on this page, it reminds me to tell you that I will share the slides as a PDF in the chat at the end, so you can just sit back and relax and just take in the content and not need to take notes or screenshots.
This is also being recorded, and the recording will be available eventually.
There you go, that too. So a better work experience starts with a better workplace. But what does that really mean? There has been a ton of speculation since the pandemic sent everybody home in March or around that time last year. And it kind of started at the beginning of like, hooray, we're never going to go back to the office. Everybody's going to get rid of their leases. We're all going to work from home. This is the future. And the pendulum's kind of swung to the other end of that now, where we're starting to see articles about you have to be back in the office. If you're not in the office, you're going to be fired. And it may not be one of those two extremes. That's something that this last year has really emphasized in our culture, is that idea that humans like to hang on to biases because it helps us understand and interpret our world. And this is one of them. It's a binary bias. So it doesn't mean that it's one or the other. And it would be really easy for us as a furniture manufacturer to say, like, of course, we're going to be back in the office. You need to buy some office furniture. But we are dedicated and committed to being science-based and data-driven and finding the best solution for the people that are working in these workplaces. So we have been doing research since last March, and with the first iteration of this presentation we released in January. So I include this slide here just so you can see the difference in the numbers, because this slide came out in January and this is our most recent one in June. And you can see in the little gray numbers there how much it has increased just between January and June. So another 20,000 conversations and survey responses have been added, another 3 primary studies, and that plus beside primary studies is just saying that we're still doing primary studies. It's ongoing. We're continuing to research this because it's continually going to change as we come into different stages of this. This isn't something that we've necessarily experienced before. And a big part of this additional research that we've done since January is that black text at the bottom there, that post-COVID office global leader study. And that is new because one of the biggest things that we were continually being asked is, what is everybody else doing? I need to see benchmarking before I can make any decisions to move forward. So we'll get into that and what leaders are saying that they're doing to move their offices forward. But some of the previous research before that is looking at people's experiences of working from home, what it was like when they returned to the workplace last summer, because a lot of offices had come back when things had kind of slowed down over the summer months. We've also looked at floor plans and analyzed them to figure out how many spaces are already at the proper distancing, whether their geometry is adequate so you're not face to face with somebody and there isn't being enough height in between them to prevent that airflow going directly across. We have another collaboration with MIT, and I'll dig into that a little bit. In addition, we've also been looking at surface materials. So a lot of different areas of research that we've been analyzing and have been interpreted throughout this presentation. So with all of those studies, what does better mean? It has taught us that we need to bring people back to something that is both safe and compelling. And that is because working from home has this gravitational pull. It's easy to stay at home. I never wear shoes anymore. And when I do, I'm wearing flip-flops, unless I'm out for a hike, in which case I'll put on runners. And that's nice. Like when we have to go to the office, you have to get dressed up, do your hair. There's a lot more work involved. So to draw you into the office, we need it to be a compelling space. And we'll talk about different ideas of how to make it compelling and how people's expectations of that office have changed. The safety part, not something we've had to think about in an explicit way before. Just 2 years ago, I easily remember sitting shoulder to shoulder with people. And if you were sick, you just brought the Kleenex closer. You would blow your nose and still be within a foot radius of somebody you were working on a project with. Think about poring over architectural drawings and you being in close proximity. It didn't matter if you were sick. You were still there in that little bubble with those people. So now we are much more pandemic aware, and it changes how we need to design the office accordingly. So that safety part of things, we've been looking at it from 3 different angles. There's the mitigation, detection, and prevention. Mitigation is that partnership with MIT. So we partner with the Buriba Research Group, which is that image you see there. That image is from her TED Talk, where she talked about how particles move through space, and we're studying with her how different furniture applications and settings can mitigate that spread of particles through space. We're also looking at the materials. With the detection, we're in talks right now of a partnership with a company that can actually add in that COVID identification and alert system, which to me is kind of mind-blowing. And then of course, prevention. So just getting a lot more HEPA air filters being built into different furniture pieces. Not everybody can go in and completely redo their HVAC. So how can we still have that air purification in spaces so that there is that psychological comfort and safety of being in a room with your colleagues that may have 4 walls? Not everybody's there yet. And I know a few designers in town who have said to me that they're not going to go into a closed room with other people yet. So something to think about. For that compelling piece, we need to understand what those work from home experiences were like. And when our work futures researchers dove into it, we found that people kind of fit into these 5 different buckets. So there's the isolated Zoomer. They're sitting at home. Their only engagement with other people is through their screen. They may not live with anybody else. They may not have pets. So it's just a really isolating environment. the autonomy seeker loves being at home. They are the individuals who may do a little bit of work in the morning, but then they're going to go out for brunch with their friends. Then they'll do some more work, and then they might run some errands, and then they'll work later in the evening. So the idea of being able to have your day and your life and your work all integrated together and being able to ebb and flow with what the needs are of that day. Frustrated creative networker, a few of you may find yourself in this bucket, because to really generate new ideas and be creative, it's helpful to have other people around us, either questioning why we did something or critiquing something, or just coming together and sharing ideas and generating new ones is easier when you have diverse perspectives being brought together. And of course, networking. Networking is super hard through a screen. The overworked caretaker, whether that is you're taking care of a child, a parent, a spouse, a pet, a whole bunch of plant babies. And I always like to point out that my office is directly across from my sink. So overworked caretaker includes that sort of stuff too. I think about my sink and make sure that there's nothing in there for when I'm in presentations. So it's these competing demands that we have when we're in our home environment that can pull us away from effectively doing our work. And then there's the relief self-preservationist. And this isn't just about the safety and the worry around COVID and disease. When we did this research, a lot of that relief self-preservationist actually came from being from a toxic workplace. So even when COVID is passed, we still need to address those expectations of the workplace for those individuals. So these are lovely. Normally I would ask people right now to tell me who they are, but it's hard in this environment. But you might not just be one. I fit the middle three, depending on the day that it is or the time of day, whether my daughter's home from school, she's currently in the other room and my dog's at my feet. So I'm maybe in the overworked caretaker mode at the moment. It'll see, depending on how hungry she gets at dinner time. But if you tell your employer that you're an autonomy seeker and you want to work from home, that may not fly. However, boundary theory backs this up. So you can talk about the psychology of this. And it comes down to these two different, the spectrum. And on one end, we have segmentation. On the other end, we have integration. And this goes to that person environment fit. So there are individuals who, when they were sent home, yeah, they were a lot more productive. And there are other individuals who, when they were sent home, they floundered. It was awful and they couldn't do it. And it comes down to the psychology of how they function best and how aligned their environment is to that. So segmenters, they want to be in a dedicated office from 9 to 5, and they don't want to work outside of those hours. They don't want to work outside of that space. Outside of that space is non-work time. Whereas at the far end of the integration side of the spectrum, you can be that autonomy seeker and integrating work and life. You might do work on your bed, on your sofa. You might do it in an office. It doesn't matter what time of the day it is. Everything is kind of all mixed in together. And of course, it's a spectrum. So we all fit somewhere along that. And that impacts how productive we are, what our job satisfaction is, and how effective we are. So what did people like when they were working from home? The number one thing was that they didn't have to commute. And I find this interesting because when this research came out and we started presenting it, it was also around the same time that we started seeing in the media that people were creating these faux commutes. So it just goes to show that research comes from a timestamp. And again, it depends who that person is. Maybe those people that were creating that faux commute, they really needed that transition time. Maybe they are those segmenters and they just wanted to have something to signify when the non-work time became the work time and vice versa. People really didn't like isolation. So that is something that we're feeling. I'm feeling it hard. And I think we feel that even more in Vancouver. And I'm speculating on that, but based on the Vancouver Foundation's research in 2017 about isolation being a major issue here, I can only imagine that was amplified during this last year. So also what people liked is the ability to focus and be productive. Then they also said that they were gradually less productive. I find that piece interesting, and there's a lot of those kind of paradoxes that we'll come across in and it's due to that kind of boundary theory. Some people, they're going to be more productive. Other people, they're going to be less productive. But there's also a study from Stanford in the 2010s that showed that when people were sent home, so it was a remote work study, they found that in the beginning, people were very productive and they gradually became less productive. And they connected it to social cohesion. So it's that idea of when you're engaged, you're going to be more productive. So every 90 days, they would come back into the office and that would allow them to be productive, and then it would slowly taper off again. So just something to keep in mind. So moving forward, we're going to talk about the things that people need, some of the macro shifts that we saw in the research, and some new design principles. The 5 things that people need. They don't sound very new. Safety, belonging, productivity, comfort, and control. However, Zoom and Teams weren't really new at the beginning of the pandemic either, but the need for them was amplified extremely over the course of the pandemic. And that same thing happens with these people's needs. So safety is now amplified in addition to all of these others. When we asked people what their priorities were around safety, you can see that like the top 2 there was a tie for air quality and adherence to safety protocols. Air quality is something that people are considering so much more now, and that's a big thing for people going back into older offices that may not have the same HVAC. And faculty cleanliness. It's that idea of being at a gym, and you know when you're at a gym and you have to wipe down your machine when you're done using it. A lot of people are kind of coming up with those same concepts when they have an unassigned desking model. You clean in, you clean out. And that's something that's becoming more common in offices. Of course, the distancing and boundaries, I question if those maybe have moved past their time here in Vancouver and we're getting a little bit less so, but those are things that we are going to be seeing as we move along. They are important, and it's a question that we should be asking our clients is what their employees are prioritizing, because if they don't feel comfortable and safe in a space, they're not going to be doing their best work. Belonging. I love this one, but it's one of those like fluffy, touchy-feely kind of concepts that when you talk to a client, like if you're talking to a facilities manager or like the CEO or the CTO or one of those people in the company, they might be like, that's not our area. However, if you show them the right-hand part of the slide, it actually affects things that are going to impact the bottom line. So the sense of community you feel is going to make you more productive. It's going to have higher engagement. It's going to retain employees. And this is critical right now. Microsoft just released some research in March saying that 40% of people said that they were planning on leaving their organizations this year. And when we looked at tech companies and see that they're already doing this remote thing, it's important to also know another statistics, and that's in North America. The average tenure, so the amount of time that a software engineer stays at an organization, is only 35 months. And in San Francisco and Seattle, it's actually 27 and 28 months. So retention is really important, and that comes to that sense of community. And that is impacted by being in the office, as we can see when we have those more remote companies. People just don't stay for as long in most cases. And of course, innovation. So the ways that we can measure community are in that top part of the circle there. So it's purpose, belonging, resilience, trust, and inclusivity. And we can impact all of those through the workplace design. So having leader presence and accessibility, so not sticking a leader's office in the corner somewhere where they aren't seen, but actually having them out in the center. And part of that is just policy and talking to leaders and asking them to be present in these spaces so that there can be more engagement and so it can foster that sense of community. And of course, social spaces that again facilitate socialization so that people can feel that sense of belonging. Often when we're in an office, we will have approximately on average 75 minutes per day of informal conversations, which sounds like a really huge number. But if you break it down to like lunch and breaks and things like that, an informal conversation is what allows us to build up that social trust and that affect-based trust that allows us to take risk. And that's what then leads to that innovation. So stimulating and inspiring is also just something that will promote that ideation and creative problem solving. So trust, again, here, that's where that informal conversation comes in. When you're near people, you're more likely to have conversations with them. So both proximity and visibility are super important for building trust. And you'll see on these research review slides that I have here, I've cited the research at the bottom, so you can always go in and read some more on it. Belonging. This is one I just read on Monday night, and I had to include it because I loved this line here, that social belongingness is a fundamental human need. Because I truly believe that it is, especially after this year that we've had. So they also talk about how employees without closer supportive relationships at work are more likely to feel disconnected from their jobs, and that's going to affect their performance. So when we see that productivity drops off over time, that's that social cohesion part, that is that belonging part. And this is actually a study that is about the impact of COVID-19. So here's, again, just reiterating from our Steelcase research that we found that when engagement dropped, productivity also dropped. And people want to feel productive. They want to feel like they're making a contribution and making progress. So this is one of those things about why people want to return to the office. So both leaders and employees said that collaboration was #1 reason that they want to come back into the office. We want to be around people and connect with people and ideate together, brainstorm, come up with creative solutions together. And it's really those diverse perspectives that are able to come together and create new ideas and innovate. But in the same way that we burn out so badly when we have those back-to-back Zoom calls with no breaks in between, we can't do that same thing to people when they come into the office. If we're only designing the office for collaborating, for social, for meetings, they're going to burn out just as fast. We still need that time in between those meetings to do that heads down focus work. Maybe we're going to do a follow-up to the meeting that we just had. Maybe we need to do prep for the one that we have later. It's also after a deep brainstorming session and you have all these new ideas, sometimes you just need to have that moment of rejuvenation to let it percolate and to let all the ideas come together so you can connect it to other concepts that you already have and then create even more new ideas. So along this collaboration point, there is this Allen curve, and it's actually from the 70s. It is from an architecture magazine, academic paper. And they found that we are 4 times as likely to communicate regularly with somebody 6 feet away than we are from somebody 60 feet away. And this has been replicated in 2018. So these new colors on the curve there have shown that even with the advance of email and text and chats and all the things that we have access to now, we still communicate with people more if we are closer to them than when we are further from them. And this has been replicated in other studies as well. Apple Muhlenbrook is one of the best ones for it. And she has 3 or 4 papers on how important it is to be in the same space and to have visual and audible awareness of those around you, because that is what engages those interactions. And then I included this in here as well, just because these 10 factors for productivity, we can control for them when people are in a workplace. But when people are at home, we are unable to control these factors that are going to impact their productivity. So we have no control over how productive people can be at home. Even if they are that personality that can work from home, there are these additional factors that will still be impacting their productivity. And again, we'll also share these slides so you can read them in detail. And of course, comfort. I don't know about you, but at home, you definitely were thinking about your comfort a lot more, especially when it came to ergonomics. For a while there, I was keeping a textbook under my feet because I'm short and my heels didn't touch the ground because I don't have a steel face chair and I really should get one soon. Also thinking about cognitive comfort, it's being able to have those spaces where you have complete distraction-free zones, where you can also rejuvenate, where you can ideate. And then emotional. We need that connection to people and being able to feel that sense of community. And of course, control. So people want control over where and how they work, especially after this year where they have felt that sense of control. So going back, we found that 54% want to work from home 1 day a week or less. And a majority want control over how they reconfigure their furniture, yet only 38% can. When talking about control, and this last year that we've had, there's a lot of people that are dreaming about that day where they can become a nomadic worker and work from anywhere. However, even nomadic workers feel that there are certain spatial needs that they need to find to do different types of work. And they broke it down into focus work, collaborative work, and socialization work. And you can see those different spaces that they're using, like the co-working cafe, Airbnb, beach hotel rental unit. A lot of them look lovely, but the majority of their work is being done in a co-working space, which is an office. So when we think nomadic worker, everybody thinks that Instagram shot where they're in a lounge chair on a beautiful beach with a beautiful drink beside them and their laptop on their lap, but it's not actually that. Something I also like to point out on this is that they have this additional area of work that they refer to as articulation work. And it's the idea of figuring out what work you're going to do where and organizing where you're going to be. So like saying, I'm going to be at the co-working space from this time to this time because I need to have these meetings with these people and I need to network with these people. And then I'm going to go to the Airbnb so I can sit at the desk and do focused work for these hours and so on and so on. We are going to have to go back to offices thinking that same sort of way. So thinking that I'm going to sit at my desk or at a desk because it may not be an assigned desk for these hours because I need to get this work done, but I'm going to reserve a space in this meeting room for this activity, and I'm going to reserve this other space for this social activity I'm doing later. So this articulation work is going to be added to part of our days. Also, because I like the fluffy stuff, I like that even those nomadic workers feel they need that space where they can feel like members of a community. They still need the ability to network and to share tacit knowledge, to be innovative. So they're not just individuals working alone on a beach somewhere. They're still needing to feel connected in an office. It's no different. However, instead of all becoming nomadic workers and hunting for spaces to get work done, many organizations are just redesigning their spaces to make working from the office a compelling one. So this is that hybrid work. In a way, it's kind of like being a nomadic worker. You may not be on a beach, but it's still giving you that control over where you're getting work done. Maybe some of the work is happening at home, Airbnb, and then you're choosing those other places where you're getting work done. So instead of that co-working space, you're going into the office and you're choosing the right space for the activity that you're doing, whether it's that meeting space, the social space, the rejuvenation space, the headstone space. But it's really hard, and no organization is going to be exactly the same as another organization. So how do we move forward from that? There are limitless options, and we've been seeing them in the headlines. So you're going to see these different available options from Google, Microsoft, Ford, JP Morgan Chase, and everybody's kind of giving a different idea about how they're going to approach it. But it's really all about how can we bring people back so they can reconnect with their colleagues and leaders and begin to reestablish that social capital, the trust and sense of belonging. So the CEO of Alphabet, and that's the head of Google, they said that no company at our scale has ever created a fully hybrid workforce model. And it's true, we haven't. We've been working in a way that maybe a little bit of mobility, like you can work from home one day a week or for like a couple hours because you had an appointment that day or something like that. But we've been comparing going into a hybrid model with a lot of these big tech companies. So companies like Automatic, and Automatic is the parent company to WordPress. WordPress is the company that powers over 70% of the websites on the internet. So it's a big company. They are fully remote, or they consider themselves fully remote. There is a selection bias when we look at something like that, because people who apply to work for a company that is fully remote, they're probably already of that personality type. They probably already have the environment at home that is suited for that remote model. So we can't compare to those types of companies. Also, even this fully remote company understands the importance of social cohesion and in-person time. They get together 1 week, 4 times a year. And that is so that they can build that team cohesion, but also there's this really fun word, eventization. And eventization means coming together with the same group of people in a novel space, a new space that you haven't been to before, for a set period of time. We experience this when we go to a conference, or when you have, say, like a regional meeting, when everybody gets together offsite. And that experience allows people to generate more buzz and energy, and they know it's for a set period of time. So you feel this immediacy, and you're more likely to share new ideas with people. And there's a lot of innovation and growth that comes out from this eventization. So by having those 1 week periods 4 times a year, they're able to foster that as well. So what are our leaders saying about hybrid? When we talk to people around the world, this is our benchmarking. We found that 96% of organizations are planning to change their long-term workplace strategy. That's huge. That's pretty much everybody. And this wasn't the same last summer. So last summer, people were thinking like, we'll just go back to what it was before. Like, it wasn't going to take so long. It wasn't going to create this massive shift. But now we're seeing that most people are looking to shift. The next number, that 13%, also last summer, we were seeing a lot of people talk about a hub and spoke model or a satellite model. And that isn't necessarily as large of an increase that we thought it would be. And this is the last bias that I'm going to throw at you. But as humans, we have an affinity bias. So we like to be around people who are similar to who we are. And if you think about Vancouver and those stereotype maps, so think of the stereotype of who lives in Kitsilano versus Commercial Drive versus the West End. And there's a shred of truth to those stereotype maps. And that is because of our affinity bias. We'd like to be around people who are similar to us. What does that have to do with a hub and spoke model? When you have a headquarters, you're bringing in people from a whole bunch of different regions. If you have a hub and spoke model, you're only bringing in people from a very distinct small region. So you're not going to be bringing together as many diverse perspectives, and that has a potential to increase innovation and growth. So something to think about why maybe that satellite model isn't the best way forward. And then that question that we asked in the beginning, which it seemed like a lot of people weren't quite back in the office yet, but we are finding that leaders are allowing their employees to choose their in-office days. So you can see here that 31% are letting their employees choose daily, 46% are allowing employees to choose a consistent day. So maybe every week they're always going to be in on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And only 23% are allowing, or the companies are the ones choosing when their employees are going to be in the office. And then this one was very different in our poll at the beginning. So we found that 58% believed that their organization footprint was going to increase before December 2022. So this is talking to HR, this is talking to real estate, interior designers, facilities people globally. 29% believed it was going to maintain the same real estate footprint, and only 13% thought it was going to decrease. So this is normally where I like to get a little bit of engagement. So I'm excited to see what you have to say in the chat about that one at the end. So some of those spaces that are going to need to change and maybe be added. So increasing the technology in enclave, so those small spaces where you can do those hybrid collaboration meetings, high performance ancillary. So that is those ancillaries, so those social spaces, but making them high performance in a way that they are giving you the proper posture and ergonomics, that there is power involved, that you can pull up a table, that the table that you're pulling up is at the proper height so you can work at a laptop on it. That's what we mean by high performance. Collaborative spaces in general, but especially those hybrid collaboration spaces. And by hybrid, we mean that some people are in the office and other people are remote, but they are collaborating together. When we say collaboration in general, it's just those people in the office that are collaborating together, and we need to facilitate both of them. When just looking at US organizations and large ones, so over 10,000 employees, when I think about Vancouver, we may not have ones on level with that, but 89% are shifting to more unassigned workstations. And in the poll, it sounded like a lot of the Vancouver companies are also considering shifting to more unassigned workstations, which makes sense because if you're not in the office every day of the week, you are taking up real estate if you have an assigned desk and you're not there and nobody else is able to use it. So what they're doing with that space is they're shifting that into more of that collaborative space, or they're adding, 67% have said that they're adding more collaborative space. A lot of leaders are also saying that they're going to pilot. And I think this is really important because as much as we can tell you the benchmarking, there is no one size fits all. Every organization is a little bit different, and it's really entering this with an experimentation mindset and collecting data. So asking questions at the beginning before you start the pilot, and then letting it go for a while, and then asking questions again to figure out where you need to shift and where things need to change. So we are finding that there's a lot of significant pilots happening, some minor pilots, but very few people are not piloting at all. And then this is a non-steel case study. This is from McKinsey. So in addition to what you guys had said at the beginning about not having, I think it was actually 63% of you at the beginning said that there was no detailed plan in place. So pretty on par with what McKinsey is showing as well about not having a detailed plan communicated or in place. And a hybrid work plan is hard. It's one thing to design the space for it. It's another thing to design the policies and to implement that change management. So we'll jump into that too. So there's no one correct way to do this, but understanding that even us at Steelcase, we have a global organization. We have distributed teams for over a decade. I personally, I work from home most days, but I also have the privilege of being able to work from Heritage Office Furnishings, which is Liz, who is here with us today. And they have a beautiful space I'm able to work out of. So I technically am a distributed team member with Steelcase because I don't have an office here in Vancouver. So we've been doing this for a decade. So we've been able to study it for that time too. So how do we make that a good experience? Again, this is one of those things where you're going to get a ton of different structures, a ton of different opinions, what leaders want, what employees want, and how do we bring that all together? The biggest thing is we need a compelling space to bring people back into the office, especially to overcome that commute, which is the number one thing that is preventing people from coming back into the office, whether that commute is just a long drive or taking transit and they don't feel safe enough yet to take transit. So to develop this successful hybrid strategy, we need to look at the needs of individuals, teams, and organizations. So individuals, that's what we're talking about with the boundary theory, the different personalities that are there. Teams, it could be looking at maybe we don't need the same thing for the accounting team that we need for the marketing team. One is much more task-based, numbers-based, and the other one is much more creative and possibly needing the like hands-on co-located experience. So they're going to have different needs in an office. And then of course the organization and how they're able to communicate their culture through that hybrid strategy. The big piece of it is determining where and how people will work. So whether they're going to be an in-office worker, and maybe part of that is because of the needs that they have and the equipment that they need, they have to be in the office, or maybe some are going to be fully remote, but we are seeing that bulk of them are going to be that hybrid where they're spending 2 to 4 days per week in the office. How do we decide that mobility strategy? So in the past, we were looking at a 1-to-1 person to personal seat ratio. So whether that was like a personal desk you had, but it was a 1-to-1. Now that may not be the case. We need to look at the culture, the job function requirements. So if they have equipment in the office that they have to be around to be able to get their job done, that's important. They may need to have an own desk there. That personal suitability, that comes down to that individual again, and whatever their personality is and how their environment is at home. Maybe they don't have what they need at home, whether it's that personal space, or maybe they just don't, they have too many distractions and they need to be in the office. But then we need to make sure that we have like the change management, this workplace strategy in place to support all these changes. So to manage the change, and this is super surface level, it just hopefully giving you some knowledge to know the questions that you need to ask next, because change management is such a huge topic, and we're just showing this one slide, but high level of it is you need those champions, those people who are going to embrace the change and inspire others to change with them. It needs to be inclusive so everybody can jump in, get on board, and there aren't going to be any barriers for anybody to be part of that change. Cultivating new behaviors. Sometimes that takes work. So that's why in the beginning, when I was asking what's going to entice you to come back into the office, in the beginning, we are going to have to actively entice people to come back to the office. Maybe it is saying, hey, on Thursday, it's going to be Thirsty Thursday, and we're going to have drinks at 3 p.m. You're going to have more people, oh, maybe you won't, more people in the office that day, and all day long, those people are going to be experiencing that buzz and energy of being around their colleagues again. And that is what is going to encourage them to come in another time. It may not be the drinks at the end of the day, it's that vibe that they felt while they were there. But if we return to the office and it's just a trickle of people, it's not going to feel so great, and it's not going to be enticing enough to maybe bring us back. So in the beginning of cultivating that new behavior, we need to entice people back. We need to craft those different experiences that'll encourage them to come back, and we can kind of taper that off as people return to the office. And of course, going back to that idea of that experimentation mindset. So there's a lot of different ways that we can approach this, and different ways that we're looking at is through social hubs, flexible team neighborhoods, and many different areas where people can sit down and do some collaboration. However, part of hybrid is still working from home. So we need to consider what those home environments are. And we have found that people are generally in one of these 4 bubbles. And from the temporary setup at the kitchen table with your laptop on a stack of books to the home office with a closed door of no distractions, you're going to get from less productive to more productive. So that needs to be considered when you're looking at the hybrid strategy. And finally, when people have the option to work both from home and when they have control over where they're going to work in the office, not in an assigned desk, but in various different areas and zones, it's helpful to show them what a new typical week might look like. And part of this is because people may not feel like they can actually do these things. It may be said in a document somewhere that you have the option, but unless they're seeing examples of how other people are executing it, it's hard to feel like it's part of what you're capable of doing. So by giving them examples of various different weeks, and especially this, you may not be able to see the nuances of it here, but all the yellow is at home work. So they're showing this person is starting work at 5 a.m. on Wednesday, but they're ending a lot earlier. Or on Thursday, they're doing a lot of work from home in the morning, and then all this gray is non-work time. They're actually having lunch with their kid, then they're helping their kid with online learning, and then they're doing a little bit of work later, taking a dinner break, and a little bit of work after that. So it's breaking down all the different ways that we can experience a hybrid week. And just another change management piece. So the role of place. It is, how do we compel people back? And a big piece of that is making these spaces super dynamic. Part of dynamic is making them flexible, adaptable. You can move things. It may not look the same every day, perhaps. They're energizing. We can add color, lots of plants. They're inspiring, and they allow you to be super productive. And we'll dive into these social hubs and hybrid collaborative spaces. So a social hub is that way to create that buzz and energy that I was talking about with eventization. So it's just new ways to collaborate. It's ways that where you might have different levels of privacy throughout a social hub. It could be centrally located. So when you're coming in, there's a space that you can grab some people and you can sit down and have a coffee and have a working meeting first thing in the morning. It's just creating that energy that fuels the rest of your day. So again, they're for all different diverse modes of work. It's not necessarily the social hubs are just for generative collaboration. It might be for having an informative meeting where you're sharing information. It could be just a social meeting where you're having lunch together. Sorry, need water, cracking. So one of the ways that we can start adding these new spaces in is to consider a pilot. And I was thinking about this when I was preparing this presentation. A really easy idea right now, I know a lot of design firms in Vancouver are not allowing outside guests into their offices yet. I think a lot of organizations are just keeping it to their set employees. So a great idea for a pilot space would be these beautiful entry spaces, reception areas that we can put some of this furniture in and get a feel for how people are going to use it. It's an unactivated space currently, and we can activate it by just allowing it to be an additional space where people can collaborate and create that buzz and energy, and you would feel it right when you came into the office. And it's furniture that you can then move into the larger office when you started using those entry spaces again. So, hybrid collaboration. When people are together in person and others are remote is a really complex design problem, because it'll be different from when everyone was at home and we were all working the same way on the same platform like we are now. We're all in the exact same situation, so it's very equitable. As people are in different locations, we need to make sure it's a good experience for people on both sides of the camera, and that can be really hard. We need to consider the lighting, the camera, the audio, the content, and how everything is being shared. And content isn't always as easy as just sharing a PowerPoint like I am right now. If I was drawing on a whiteboard, or even a digital whiteboard would be easier, but if it was a physical analog whiteboard, how am I sharing that content as well? And how can we see both content and people, and for them to be of equal sizes? So really looking at those hybrid collaboration spaces with those things in mind. And we need to be able to adapt and really make it so that the virtual collaboration is for all things. So collaborating, social. I don't know about you guys, but we haven't had a lot of informal virtual meetings in this time period of COVID. It's hard because it's one of those things, you're on Zoom and Teams all the time for work. You don't necessarily then want to do an additional thing on Zoom or Teams when you don't have to. So how can we still collaborate with people in those other typologies as well? And here are the three concepts. It needs to be equitable. And this is the big, complex, hard puzzle piece of it, is when you're in the office and other people are at home, you need to be able to see their faces at the same size that you see all the other people's faces that are in the office with you, or else you're not going to be calling on them as much. So if I were up at the front presenting and I've got a screen with 6 faces on it, and then I have 6 people in front of me, it's not equitable. Also, if we're all looking at a presentation and there isn't somebody up at the front speaking, say there's 5 of us in an office and we're all looking forward at a screen, we shouldn't also be looking at the screen of people. They should have the same viewpoint that we do, so they should be in line with us. And I'm saying these different examples, but on the next slide, I'll show you where you can find them yourself. So equity is the biggest part and the hardest part about hybrid collaboration. Of course, then there's engagement and ease. It needs to be easy. It needs to be intuitive for people to use these different things, to walk into a room and know how it's done. If it's hard, people aren't going to do it. And the people who are at home may feel like second tier employees because they aren't being engaged in the same sort of way. So here's my little present to you, is this document here, which you can go download yourself, and it is a guide about how to do these hybrid collaboration spaces. And when you dive into that, it also talks about different policies that you can use to execute them in an office. So just some etiquette and policies that make it easier to move through this hybrid process. Some of the macro shifts, I'm just checking my time here. These macro shifts, they're super high level. These were things that we saw as trends in that first phase of research that we did, but they were trends that were at the building level or the facility level and not necessarily at the furniture level. So we kept on coming across them, so we felt compelled to share them, but they aren't necessarily something that we feel is our wheelhouse because we didn't dive into this. It's not necessarily the furniture part. So safety, instead of just thinking about those health and safety standards that you need to pass for inspection, safety is now moving to how do we mitigate the spread of disease, which is not something that we've thought of outside of hospitals before. Productivity is now, how do you make a multimodal space? So a space that can facilitate the various modes of work, whether it's learning or focused work or collaboration or social and rejuvenation. And then inspiration. So really fostering that community, that belonging that we've already been talking about, and flexibility. So who knows if we're going to have more variants of this or new viruses in the future. We need spaces that can ebb and flow with the social densities that are required at that given time. And then these new design principles. There are 4. I'm going to dive into the open and closed on the next page, but it's really balancing both those individual spaces, those me spaces, with those we spaces. And we kind of consider the 4 main space types to be personal, collaborative, learning, and social. Of course, that fixed to fluid, which I was just saying, the multimodal, but just highly adaptable, having mobile furniture. So giving people that choice and control over even moving their furniture around and configuring different spaces where more people can get together, or less people, or more separate groups when it's needed. And flexible architecture elements as well. Skipping over to braiding digital and physical. We've all seen how much digital has advanced in the last year, and that's just going to continue. So how do we braid that into these physical environments? And how do we collect data so we can continue to make smart decisions moving forward? So really using those sensor technologies to collect that data. The open, I think it was important to look at the bigger image of this one here. So if you look at the me spaces at the top, the gray boxes were what it was before the pandemic. And you can see that we had a lot of open me spaces and very few closed me spaces, which makes sense. We were living in this open office world, and there was very few enclaves that you could jump into for a personal phone call. What we're moving to is a complete inverse of that, which you can see in the blue. So now the big blue box is on the enclosed side, and the little blue box is on the open side. So we're having a lot more enclosed me spaces and a lot less out in the open. However, a lot of those are being moved down into this open collaborative spaces, versus before we used to only have, well, not only, but the majority of our collaborative spaces were fully enclosed. And if you think about meeting rooms and collaboration, conference rooms and things like that, they all had 4 walls around them. So now we're getting a bit of a balance between those open and closed spaces, which you can kind of see here. So this is an idea of a social hub. So this integrates those 4 different design principles. You can see spaces for the individual over here. There's spaces for groups to get together. They are more open spaces, but they definitely allow you to still do some analog brainstorming, digital conferencing with other people. So really taking a lot of those different design elements and bringing them together, but these are all highly dynamic spaces, so you can reconfigure them. It's multifunctional and they're high performing, so you get a lot of work done. An example of that hybrid collaborative space is this one here, and this can be a concept that is either fully enclosed with 4 walls, but obviously we show it here so you can see into the space. It could have flexible barriers here, whether it's with the acoustic barrier that can go in front. But part of that idea of having 3 walls is, again, to do with that psychological safety of people not being quite ready to be in a room with fully enclosed walls. So this gives them the opportunity to take a step back if they need a bit more distancing. And in the guide that I shared with you previously, you can see a lot more of these examples of even just showing like where you would put the display, where speakers and microphones should be, where cameras should be, to get the best angles and to make it the most equitable experience for that hybrid collaboration. And now I'm just going to flip through pretty pictures because we're at time. So this is actually in Grand Rapids, which is where our headquarters is. And this is our redesign of the offices there. So I'm just going to show you a few. Know that you can follow up anytime. We can always do a virtual Grand Rapids trip, which is kind of fun because we can get different people engaged and you can talk to our experts in Grand Rapids as well. But this is an example of one of those spaces that is not fully enclosed, but it's where people can feel safe, where they can take that step back. This person's technically sitting outside of that space, but they're still able to be part of that meeting. And you can add different acoustical elements and visual separation elements to it. more ideas for what that could potentially look like. Just again, highly mobile pieces. The acoustical barriers can change. They can be brought around to different sides. More could be added so it feels more enclosed and intimate should that be necessary. It's that comfort space, that front porch kind of space that allows you to sit back a little bit more and have more of that open dialogue and share new ideas and create together. Here's another idea of a hybrid collaborative space where it has both that analog and digital displays, the very mobile desk tables that you can pull apart, bring together depending on what your needs are. And I like this one because, again, this is right before you get into the social hub area, which is at the back here, but it just has a bunch of different meeting room types, but they're open, again, to allow that airflow, except they have a bit of a vertical barrier here. And that is one of those things where, to prevent the spread of disease, it's nice having those vertical barriers to stop particles from moving vertically through space. So it can be as simple as that. And here's some examples of those social spaces where you have so many different settings. And in this space in Grand Rapids, there's many, many different settings. There's a desk or a table back here, which has a display, but this is more living room tight. But you actually have power here that you can plug into. You've got your laptop tables. There's another table over here, and there's just a whole bunch of different settings. So you're definitely going to have that buzz and energy because there's going to be a bunch of different groups in this same space together. And that's one of the first spaces you walk into when you get to our headquarters. And this is just more of that same social space. It's just over a little bit. So really giving people choice and control if they want to be at a standing desk, if they want to be more loungy and sitting. Even an individual could go in here and just kind of get their own heads down work done as well. The idea of that psychological safety brought in from having both like overhead lighting and the rug to kind of make the space feel a bit more intimate. And seeing that we still do have individual desking. And I wanted to show these because they're not completely surrounded by 5-foot high screens. So I love seeing that we are getting back to being at a desk without it being fully enclosed by plexi or something like that. And it's inspiring. And I like that it's light and there's biophilia and color. So I just wanted to showcase that as well. That goes to that energizing space. So really making it a compelling space that people want to be in. The last thing I will point out is this barrier here, and it's just a really simple way of separating space. But recently I saw an article and they were talking about how we've all gone through this trauma, and it takes longer to build up trust after you've been through trauma. And this is one of those features that actually helps with that because people don't want to be snuck up on. So they were talking about this in this article and it was related to COVID-19, but there is a book called The Remix, and it's all about multi-generations in a workplace. They talk about the exact same thing when they talk about millennials, and millennials have problems building up trust, especially when you have an open space behind them and somebody can approach them without them noticing. And it's because a lot of millennials, more so in the US than in Canada, they grew up with 9/11, they grew up with school shootings. So they have a lot of this trauma ingrained. So they have a lot of the same safety and trust issues that we're now finding people are having coming out of this trauma that we've just had globally. So different little things to keep in mind. And then I just go back to showing more color and energizing spaces that we can really be doing some of those hybrid collaborative engagements in. And this is the final one here. Just a whole bunch of different examples of what that could potentially look like. So a better hybrid work experience starts with a better workplace. And we're always here to help. And there's a lot of different next steps that we can always take. So I welcome you to reach out anytime, either to me or Liz. We're always ready to answer any questions or help out however we can.
Thank you so much, Robin. That was great. That was beautiful. Let me just start sharing my camera too. And I'm just going to remind everybody that there is a Q&A. If you have any questions, it would be great if you could post all of your questions in the Q&A. Also, for anybody that's getting the CEUs, they want us to send it to AIBC. Please type it in the chat. Or if you want the AIA, and what was the other one? There was another one.
IBCEC.
Yeah, IDCC. So you can then email Robin for that if you need those units. Okay, so that was very, very interesting, Robin. A lot of the numbers were actually surprising for sure. First, I actually want to see, because some of them were very surprising to me. What was the most surprising numbers that you saw? You can type it in the chat. Which numbers were the most surprising to you guys? And we actually have 3 questions also coming up. So while everybody's actually thinking about it, maybe because I took a lot of photos also, and I went back on them as you were like showing some photos. Obviously, that slide that you said, if you guys like have any thoughts on it about the real estate, that was definitely very surprising. It was, what was it, a 58, 68 something increase?
Well, and a part of that, when you dive into it a little bit, this was taken, I want to say in March. I'll have to go back and double check exactly when the timestamp on that is, because things are always changing. But their prediction of the gross national profit increase was something, it was increasing. It was no longer decreasing. And that's what a lot of these numbers end up being related to, because when organizations are looking at their growth, they're comparing it to the overall growth of their country as well. So that's what kind of drives those. And because there is growth happening, the growth is going to happen in the organizations as well.
Yeah, we actually have in the chat, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your names perfectly correct. Dragana is saying what was surprising was 96% of organizations will change the workplace strategy. I actually agree. That was also very surprising for me, that, and also the pilot one, that was.
I love that you say that, because I often, I feel like in Vancouver, we're a unique little bubble. So it is, that's why I wanted to kind of get some feel for what everybody's answers were here, because it does feel a bit different here. And I don't feel like we have felt the pandemic as hard as other places.
Sure.
We didn't have the same sort of lockdowns and everything. We weren't constrained in the same way that a lot of other people were. So that's where I think we're going to get a bit of discrepancy with the numbers that we see from people here in Vancouver versus what we see across Canada or North America or even globally.
That's true. Yeah, that is very true. Of course, we were very lucky in the terms of not having those constraints, but at the same time, we're not the companies in Vancouver are also thinking about these changes and the strategies a little bit less probably than a lot of other places. So I guess we don't feel it as much. Nadine is saying, agreed that the real estate space not shrinking is surprising. As for years, offices have been trying to have more people in less space. True. Yeah.
Well, and that is interesting too, because we were shrinking, but our density was increasing. So even though we were trying to have less space, we were still trying to get more people in that smaller amount of space. So that is shifting because of the understanding that we need to give people that space. So maybe it'll be interesting to see how it shifts, because the old model of doing hybrid work or like flexible work arrangements or activity-based workspaces used to be that you should have at least the number of seats available should you have everybody show up on one day.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing that happen in this return to work stage that we're going into. The numbers are less than, so you wouldn't be able to have everybody show up on one day. And I don't know if that's going to be a trend across the board or if it's just something that's happening in Vancouver. So that'll be an interesting one to watch too.
So now I'm going to read off of some of the questions that were popped in the Q&A. We have 3 open questions right now. With the growth in, that's from Dragana, with the growth in open collaborative space, are there any strategies we can consider for noise mitigation, particularly if we are also considering a mix of digital/analog communication?
Yes, so disease mitigation, see, that's where I am. Noise mitigation, obviously there are different furniture elements that are going to help with that and reduce that. Soft furnishings, different acoustical barriers are going to help in that. Sound is a wave, so a lot of vertical elements, even if they are flexible pieces, are going to help with that. However, a really big part of this is policy. So it is that etiquette. It is being very explicit in that. And And this is one of those things, and I have a moment to pull it up. There is a really great paper about this, and it does talk about like some best practices. And so things to consider when you are in those open collaborative spaces is having zones. So maybe you have one zone of the office that is the buzz and energy zone. Maybe the social hub is where you are allowed, where you have a social contract that this is a space I can answer my phone there, I can talk to people there. Maybe that social contract is that you should only talk to people that you are in that same kind of space with. Like if you're at a table, don't go talking to somebody at a different table, would be a part of that. And then you're going to have a different zone that maybe is a mid-level, like you can answer your phone, but walk away and go step into something else. Or if somebody's going to come talk to you in that space, maybe it's only for 5 minutes, and that's the limit of that amount of time. And then you're going to have another zone like a library, and there's no talking in there. And that's a big part of those open collaborative spaces, is making sure that people know the etiquette within each of them, and that they have options of where they can go depending on what their work needs are.
Yeah. Next question. Actually, that's not a question, that's a comment. Nicole is saying, amazing presentation, full of information and guidance. Thank you, Nicole. It was amazing. Yes, agreed. There is another question. It's anonymous. What is the most effective way to implement these improvements when there is no extra space or budget to play with?
Great question. That is a hard one. So by not adding new furniture and just using what you have within the space that you have, it would really depend on where you're starting from. I know it's a terrible answer. I would say reach out. Let's have a conversation and we can see where that can go. I think there could be some creative solutions that you could talk about. Yeah, I need more information on that one. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. The next one from Shane. Are many firms in a position where they have more employees today than when they vacated in office in March 2020? How are they dealing with this? Finding a larger space, working in shifts, examples, teams, Team A, Monday, Tuesday, Team B, Wednesday, Thursday?
Yes, is the first answer. Yes, we are. Like, I've had multiple conversations with organizations where they have said that if everybody were to come in the office, there would not be a spot for everybody to sit down. So they do have more people now. And based on the rate of hiring right now in Vancouver, I would say that that number is just going to keep on increasing. But this is the benefit of hybrid, is not all desks are being used by the same person every single day. That person may be at home for that one day a week. And so yes, they have the option of finding a larger space. I haven't seen an organization that is doing that. Some people are still shrinking, even though their current space doesn't hold all their people. Excuse me. But that working in shifts, that's a really hard one. I want you to think, Shane, so think of somebody that you work with and they sit beside you, and hopefully you like them. Like, hopefully the person beside you sits beside you. If they were to say like, hey, that person's not going to come in on the days that you're in because you guys are going to start sharing a desk, that is really going to impact that social cohesion and that connectedness, especially on teams. Because if half the team is only in each day, then they're not going to be able to connect in person with the other half. And it's going to impact those teams in a way that isn't going to allow them to be productive in that space. However, you can talk about it in different ways. And I dove into this with an organization where we're talking about like what kind of protocols they could put in place because they didn't have enough seats for all their people. They had seats for about a third of their people. So what kind of policies they needed to consider was decision making. How are you going to decide who is coming into the office that day? And if I'm an employee trying to make that decision, how am I going to make that decision? What is my decision tree that I'm going to work my way down through to decide if the office is the place that I should be on that day? And not just at an individual level, but also on a team level, because we need teams to come and be together in person for that social cohesion. So there's going to need to be times where you say, hey, marketing team, the second Tuesday of every month is your day for everybody to be there or something. It could be more frequent or less frequent, but it's giving teams the opportunity for everybody to be there on that same day. And people should stay committed to that because of that social cohesion. So not necessarily that team A, that team B, but really figuring out the etiquette and the processes that people need to go through before deciding where their best place to work is. And it goes back to that idea of being a nomadic worker. They're having to decide this all the time. So we're just having to adapt that mindset where instead of just starting your day at work ahead of time, you need to think, where am I going to get my best work done?
Yeah. So there is two other questions from actually Emily, because she can't post in the Q&A. And also I have a question that I wrote in my phone that I'm going to ask you at the end. If anybody else has any questions, by the way, please post it in the Q&A. So Emily is asking, question 1, you mentioned multi-generational workplaces. Does hybrid look the same for all ages, specifically those individuals who are not as comfortable with technology? That you can see in the chat, by the way, if you want to see.
Yeah, I can. And I'm pretty sure I have a media article open about that I was just reading earlier today. And the answer was no. However, I struggle with saying that with a blanket statement because I like to back things with research and not just read the media stuff. But within the multi-generational workplaces and having read a lot on that, yes, people are going to experience it differently. People are actually considering so many thoughts. Okay, so with generations, generational theory is a whole nother thing. But people were moving away from generational theory because everything was moving at such a rapid pace that we weren't having these timestamps anymore to be able to define generations. The idea was that after this next generation, like Gen Z, we were going to stop. People were talking about like an alpha, but a lot of generational theorists were saying that we're done with this. It's not going to be applicable anymore because there isn't the same timestamps. Now, because of COVID, they're talking about a Gen C, which is Gen COVID or COVID-19. And they're being defined as that because kids that are growing up in this COVID experience, it is a definite timestamp and they are going to feel that moving forward, whether we like it or not. And it's going to impact that generation in a way that we're not aware of yet. So no, it's not going to look the same. I don't know the answers as to how it's all going to be different. I wish I did, and I would love to dive into that more. And I will pull out my book about multi-generations to see what hints it might have.
Okay, great, thank you. Her next question is, can you speak a bit more about the braiding of digital? What is the role of digital in hybrid work? Not for collaboration, but more so for productivity and for companies to be able to manage their employees?
Tough question, because I'm not sure what you mean by manage. So I think it could be taken in two different ways. Manage in a sense of, trying to come up with the right word, but the word that's in my head is babysit them, like to see what they're doing and to kind of like make sure they're doing what you want them to be doing, kind of that top-down approach manage. Or it could be manage in the sense like who's coming in when. And there's that way that we're using technology too, and kind of being able to do that desk reservation, that room reservation, so that you can manage your day and manage how many employees are in the office and at what time, so you don't become over capacity, or so you don't show up at the office and there isn't any space for you to actually sit down and do something. So there's kind of those two sides of managing employees. Definitely the managing of space with employees is one that we talk about a lot more, and using sensors to even be able to say, like, we have this great meeting space and nobody's using it, yet everybody's saying they don't have space to get their collaborative work done. So it's only by using a sensor, that data, rather than somebody's subjective response about how many meeting rooms are available, that we can come to a concrete solution as to how we should move forward. When it comes to managing their employees, and in that kind of like top down Are you working? Are you not working? Are you on Netflix when you should be doing something different? I'm not seeing that as much. And I think that really comes down to if there isn't that trust there, that is going to have larger issues. And I think a lot of organizations have recognized that, and they're not kind of going in that approach. I hope that answers.
Emily, if it doesn't, Emily's actually here, so she can ask if it doesn't answer her question.
Okay.
So I'm actually going to go to my question. Might be a little bit scattered because it's kind of about the whole presentation, like bringing pieces from the end and the beginning. So at the beginning, you showed this chart that was about segmenting and the boundary chart.
Boundary theory, yeah.
Boundary theory. And you were saying that the studies have shown that people want to go back to the offices, a lot of the people, basically, because of that social and interaction, community feeling that they can get, the belonging, which was a very big portion of the presentation as well, which I really agree with, which is amazing. It's a very good thing to have for sure. But then at the end, you showed this other chart with the blue and gray squares. There is a contradiction here, which so you can even like start sharing it if you want. So
I know, I'm like, I have to go back to because that was the open and enclosed.
Yeah.
And the me and we space. Okay.
So
yeah.
in the open and enclosed, you mentioned technically, well, you're showing that people are going more towards the enclosed spaces. The blue one was bigger, but then people are actually going back for that interaction that they want, the social part, which is more in the open spaces. And I get it that it's also part of that boundary thing that you were mentioning. I can get that. But what I kind of want to know is that, yes, if you have this big office space, yes, you can create all of those spaces. If you have like, big real estate, for sure. But if you don't have a big real estate, for the companies that are not like, they're not all Microsofts, they're not all, Facebooks, like you don't have this big real estate. What do you do then? What do they do? How do you see them being able to?
It's gonna be a little bit of noise as my daughter feeds the dog, so he doesn't whine. But something about that slide with the squares, and I'm wondering, I'll pop it back up for a sec so I can talk to it. So that slide is showing the shift of ratio, not necessarily the quantity of it. So it's just saying, so especially on that top part of it here, it's saying that instead of having most of the me spaces out in the open, they're now going to be enclosed. Because if you think about when you're going into the office, you're not necessarily going to, as we looked at that poll in the beginning, a lot of people said that they're still going to stay at home to kind of do that deep work. It is that idea of where we're getting different things done. And if you need to do some focus space at the office because you would actually prefer to be doing it at home, the best option for you in the office is going to be in an enclosed room or a space where you can have just non-distracted time, because you may not want to be doing individual work in the office, but say you have a meeting in the morning and you've got a meeting in the afternoon and you have this time to kill in between where you still need to get work done. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you're still going to the office for those collaborative things, but we don't want to just go in and do that meeting without any of that downtime in between, and not necessarily downtime, but just even time to absorb what we've just taken in from those different meetings that we've had.
Yeah. I guess it would definitely be a challenge for offices that don't have that real estate, because the balance of creating these areas that you were talking about is really hard in smaller spaces. Yeah.
It is definitely, and that's why a lot of people are kind of shifting real estate from one area to another rather than taking on new real estate.
Yeah, makes sense. Actually, oh, sorry, I just saw that there was another question posted that I didn't see. Merceditas is saying, from from a financing point of view, that's in the Q&A if you want to look at it.
Yeah.
Is there a relationship among hybrid workplace option and tech infrastructure, employees' personal tech equipment and salary?
I'm I'm taking in the question. I know, like, and I don't know if this is the answer. I do know that some of the large organizations like the Facebooks and Twitters, they do have a remote work salary ratio. So depending on where you are located, it is going to impact your salary because of cost of living. I don't know if that's what you're asking though. So relationship between hybrid workplace option and tech infrastructure. Yeah, I don't know if that answers it or if you have another way to clarify that a little bit more. I'm sorry, Marcita.
You can type in the chat or type in the Q&A if that didn't answer your question, Marcelita. This was great. This was very, very informative, Robin. Thank you so much. I don't see any other questions popping up, but that really relates, I believe, to everybody, maybe a little bit less in some sides because Vancouver is more safe, but it was very, very interesting to hear globally what's happening and what people are doing. Thank you, really, really, thank you.
Thanks for having me and thanks for letting me geek out. I appreciate it. And again, anybody can feel free to reach out.
Thank you. A lot of people are thanking you in the chat if you can't see it, but thank you so much, Robin. Thank you everybody for attending. It was a great event. Hope to see you in more of our events. Please check out our social media and we're going to be posting about the next events as well. Oh, Mercedita saying thank you. Okay, questions. Okay, awesome. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.